just so that those who aren't with us can see what we talked about. So welcome everybody. Great to see you. If you haven't already, let us know in chat who you are, where you're joining us from, what your role is. I'm loving to see some familiar faces. The Philippines is very heavily represented here, but we've also got Oman. We've got Sebla, I see you from ICS in Ethiopia. We've got, let's see, a couple of other places. Julia, of course, joining us from Bogota, Colombia. So we're the only ones in the Americas, I think, at this point. But really glad to see all of you guys here. And we're just going to go ahead and get started and turn it over to Richard. So Richard, welcome. Let me see if I can find your video and pin you. There you are. So I will pin Richard or spotlight. I'm not sure which one is the best one, but let's see how that goes. And just really excited to share this journey. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second and just put it on to Richard. Richard and I shared an office in Bogota, Colombia. So we go way back. But so that was kind of the main reason that I wanted to highlight Richard. We've got some other folks from BSM, lots of other folks from BSM on the call with us. So, anybody who wants to add anything, you certainly can. And then, of course, some other schools who are familiar with conceptual transfer. So we really just kind of wanted this to be a fun Q&A. We had someone ask me, okay, tell me about schools that have had success. And so BSM is one of many schools, but one of many schools that really just has shown incredible success. So welcome, Richard. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking your time to join us. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are before we kind of get into the story?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Julie and Julia, for the opportunity to share our journey today. My name is Richard Healy, and I'm currently the head of senior here at British School Manila. This is my 6th year. Prior to that, I was based in Bogota, Colombia, where Julia is currently. And as Julie mentioned, I had the good fortune and the privilege to share an office for the best part of a year and begin that learning journey together, I think, to a certain extent. So here in Manila, as I'll share shortly, our journey has been an interesting one, particularly over the past few years. Many of the challenges that are common to all schools during the pandemic. But we're delighted to have really hit the ground running this year. We started face-to-face for the first time in 3 years, and it's been a fantastic start to the year.
Yes, excellent. I'm so glad you mentioned that already, because I think that's what's not only so remarkable about the BSM journey, because Manila was one of the places in the world with the strictest lockdown through the midst of this, but in other ways, perhaps it was almost an accelerant. I don't know. We're going to ask you that as we go through these questions. Perhaps that feeling that you guys were online for so long almost motivated faculty and students. I don't know. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about that. So I'm just going to give viewers a quick recap of what is learning transfer. This is the learning transfer mental model. Julia Briggs, who's on the call with me, and I wrote an on your feet guide to learning transfer a few years ago, and we had 3 steps, and that kind of morphed into acquire, connect, transfer, which is in my latest publication. Of step 1, students acquire understanding of individual concepts. Then step 2, they connect those concepts in relationship. And then step 3, those relationships, I love this visual of half brain, half connections, are what facilitate transfer to new situations. So we're really almost trying to train students to see concepts in new situations. And this is what I've been preaching for over a decade. Learning that transfers is my 5th publication talking about conceptual learning and transfer. And so it's just so wonderful to see a school really do what you all did. So a few that I want to highlight here. We have some of you on the call. I wish I would have known who was coming, because I would have pulled up your storyboards. But we started this course. So, in the journey, Richard and I shared an office. I wrote tools for teaching conceptual understanding while sitting next to him, while training a lot of the faculty at the school where I met both him and Julia Briggs. Then I was there in 2018, Richard. You were sort of one of the first schools in Asia, I think, that I went to, but I know you did some sort of pre-work before I got there, because I remember you were writing to me saying, we're not quite ready for you to come. And so, I just would love for you to share a little bit of what you did before I came. So I physically came there in 2018, the end of 2018, and then you were one of the first schools to agree to let me do remote work, to give some feedback on unit plans, to meet via Zoom and do remote work. I have two little kids, so I had been trying to convince schools to let me do remote work. And so you guys did pre-pandemic, we were doing some feedback on unit plans, but then we launched these courses. And I think almost every teacher took these courses and they built these storyboards. So here's one from one of your PE teachers that's really excellent of what are the anchoring concepts of the unit? How are students going to connect those concepts? And then what are those 3 transfer situations to really build that culture of transfer? So I will link all of this in a resource document that I'll share, but I wanted to share some diverse examples. So PE I started off with because your PE team is superstars, out of this world, amazing. The arts, I love this one because it's kind of centered around Greek theater, but it eventually transfers to something really real world like Black Lives Matter, because we're looking at the concepts of creativity, change, and audience. So absolutely love that real world's transfer there. And then this is from Michael Guinness in the humanities or social studies. This was geography, year 9, reducing urban inequality. What's the relationship between spatial patterns and inequality, and really looking at Manila and students taking some sort of action in looking at Manila in particular. So all of this is something that your teachers produced, and you guys even had your own, internal website where you've got even more of these storyboards. And I want to share another internal website from year 9 mathematics. And you can see that year 9 mathematics has got like a story for each of their units. And then if you sort of hover over this, and this is not available to the public, I'm just kind of flashing this for everybody to see how BSM has really taken this to the next level. You can see here for mathematics, acquire, connect, and then 2 transfers for that unit. Acquire, connect, and 2 transfers for that unit, and so on and so forth. And they're all real worlds transfer. I love this one here talking about pollution. Just so wonderful. And really the strength, I think, of what BSM has been able to show us, at least, is the student work samples. And so this is, we think that the teacher was Thomas. Thomas, you're on, I think. Was this Thomas Moore? Are you the teacher or was someone else the teacher? Let us know in chat if it wasn't you, but we just asking students to apply their science content knowledge to the Beirut explosion. And I just love this as an example because it's showing that the students don't need to do advanced chemistry when they're doing real world transfer, but that they are figuring out a super, in this case, horrific, complex situation, and they're applying their conceptual understanding. They're able to access that. And so I just love these last 2 sentences here about it connected to energy influencing matter because the ammonium nitrate already had a lot of energy. It just needed to be lighted and ignited so that it could cause the explosion. The energy influenced the matter by changing its chemical structure. That just makes my heart so happy to see a student being able to explain what happened using the concepts from their class. And then one last thing I want to share that BSM did before we turn it over to Richard is we have in our book these little sentence prompts. Although I may forget much of what I learned this year, I will always remember that blank. And we actually have that in our book as a way to for teachers to kind of think through what's the most essential elements of your course. But what BSM did was they posed those sentence stems to students and said, see what happens. What are they going to say? And so I'll just stop talking so you guys can read what this student said. Wow. When I read that the first time, I had chills. I don't know if you guys are as nerdy as me, but I was just like, oh my gosh. Okay, so Thomas says, yes, it was the science team, it was the one that was impressed and shared the outcomes. I was just the one who was impressed and shared. So the whole Key Stage 3 science team is the one that did that Beirut explosion. So thank you, Thomas, for sharing that. Very, very, very cool. So just amazing examples. For those of you who saw in my recent newsletter, there's one video of a student talking about the Beirut explosion. We've got a couple other videos of students from BSM, and they're in their houses because you guys were on lockdown. So these are the questions. I'm just going to put these up here, and I'll just be working kind of from these. So what was the journey to get here? Can you tell us more about how your internal professional development days work? Because from my perspective, I feel like that's where a lot of traction came, where teachers showcase their own examples. What do you think was, and Richard, I'll keep going back to these. Don't worry. I'm just kind of reading these for everybody who's on. What do you think was the biggest factor contributing to teacher buy-in? Because that was so beautiful about BSM, is that everybody bought in, every department is just really bought in, especially at the secondary level, the senior school. That's really harder often than the primary or elementary level. What were or are the obstacles? How did you or do you plan to overcome them? Are there any mistakes or lessons learned that we can glean and almost try to avoid with other schools? And then, of course, what's next for BSM? So that's going to take us a long time, I think, to hit all of those questions. But let's just start there. What was the journey to get here? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and again, spotlight you, Richard, so that you're there for everybody. So what was the journey, Richard? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's probably useful if I begin with explaining a bit of our school context. So in senior school, we're divided into key stages 3, 4, and 5. Key stage 3 is 7, 8, and 9. We focus on that transition from our primary up until year 6. And then it's really about developing the knowledge, skills, and conceptual understanding for our students to apply their learning outside of the classroom. And of course, prepare them for the challenges at key stage 4. In year 10 and year 11, all students complete the IGCSEs, that 2-year program, before embarking on the IB diploma. So I think I would map our journey in 3 stages: pre-pandemic, online learning during the pandemic, and then stage 3 would be our return to full face-to-face classes, which happened last year. With the pre-pandemic, we were, as Julie mentioned earlier on, we were developing our approach to concept-based learning, and we began by identifying subject-specific concepts and how they could facilitate opportunities for students to apply their learning to new contexts. And the decision was really driven by our mission and vision. And in the words of our vision, it speaks about the idea of developing positive global citizens that are willing and able to make positive contributions to their world. And we felt that taking a more conceptual approach would help us to achieve that. And I think that's certainly been the case. So as we move on to the fun parts, the online learning during pandemic, and I can smile about it now because I think we certainly come out of it. Like all schools, we had to quickly reevaluate our approach to teaching and learning and the ever-changing landscape. And as IGCSE, I can remember IGCSE and IB, they were making changes in terms of what content needed to be covered. And so did we across primary and into key stage 3 through to 4 and 5. And our mantra was very much less is more, less content and greater depth. And what nobody, of course, could have predicted was the length of the pandemic. As Julie mentioned earlier on, we had a hard time of it here in the Philippines, and we experienced 635 consecutive days online without a single face-to-face day. Now, that was tough. That was really tough.
That's insane. Yes, you guys were one of the few places on earth that were that locked down.
Yeah, it was certainly challenging, but for a variety of reasons we'll probably talk about today, it led to some of the greatest development and innovation in our curriculum and approaches to teaching and learning. And I think that was down to two things. The first was our amazing teaching staff, that despite everything that they were dealing with and being parents and teachers at the same time, they were absolutely committed to providing the very best learning experiences for our students. And I think it's fair to say that all of us in our profession, we had to adapt very quickly. We had to embrace new technology. We had to see other platforms that could support the learning process. And the second thing, apart from the incredible staff that we've got, would be the learning that transfers course. I had never seen so many teachers voluntarily sign up for a PD opportunity like that
That's
before.
a really great point, because we often have schools either make it mandatory or, completely optional, and usually only like one or two sign up. And so you made it voluntary, and so many signed up. So how did you do that?
Well, I'd like to say that it was all planned that way, but the reality is that it all happened quite organically. We believed in the model. We believed in what we had developed in consultation, in that partnership that we had with you and with Julia and the rest of the team. But we were unaware of.
Uh-oh, he froze. Are you there? There you are. You froze for a second. You said you were unaware of.
We were unaware of the level of buy-in that we would get and the impact the storyboards and the ACT model would have. So when we joined the first cohort, the level of engagement was superb, and the quality of the course, I think, generated that momentum. It is the best value CPD opportunity that I've come across in 20 years. There's no doubt about it. I can't remember. It was like $10, $20, $30, whatever it was.
It was 30 at first. At first we made it really, really cheap, but we kept creeping it up a little bit just because it is good. It's amazing quality. Yes, that's thank you for that. It is a really good.
So we first of all, it was an opportunity. It certainly wasn't an expectation. Word got around. There was a lot of buy-in, and it got to the point where we even had non-teachers. We had primary learning assistants, we had senior learning assistants, we had librarian staff, we even had counselors join because they heard about it and they wanted to engage in the process. And that was incredible to feel that level of buy-in and that momentum that was gathered, and people were talking and sharing ideas. And you mentioned earlier about Martin, our head of school. That was very powerful because along with head of primary and myself as head of senior, Martin did the course as well. And I think that's probably quite unusual for a focus on curriculum development, on teaching and learning, elements of pedagogy. But the power of having the head of school learning, reflecting, commenting, posting Flipgrid videos along with everyone else was very powerful. And I think that certainly helped in terms of the level of buy-in that we experienced.
Excellent. I'm so glad you highlighted Martin. And I think this is my experience with Martin is, I met him at FOBASIA, the Federation of British International Schools in Asia in Macau. And I had already been to BSM. Some of the other leaders already knew who I was. And I can see where, you're like, who's this consultant, who everybody already knows before I come into a school. And I've had, less than stellar interactions sometimes when that happens. And so Martin has always been just really welcoming. And like you said, just take ahead of school, taking the course alongside teachers. And he made a storyboard. I was going through, Martin, you got to send it to me so I can send it out, because I was going through my files trying to find it. But that opening video was from his storyboard. You also had Desmond Tutu talking about Ubuntu as well as one of the other videos. So they're on my YouTube channels as like great videos to really harness students' interest and conversation and thought. And so I think that's also huge. So Martin, do you want to say anything about the journey and anything that you want to share and add to Richard's story there?
Thanks, Julie. And the storyboard I did was on work I was doing with student leaders,
That's
and
right.
saw it as a great opportunity to provide a structure to what I was doing. And as we do at school, want those seniors to leave school with an action impetus. And if we could create the language for them and an understanding of concepts and how they can turn those into a transfer opportunity, it was a great opportunity for me. And so I realized that certainly at our school, while we're very proud of how we've taken this on, I would rather be a sneezer and an early adopter than a laggard, if you know that language from marketing. And certainly, as Richard was saying, it did become rather popular, and the sneezers and the early adopters were very positive about their experiences and how they could use learning the transfers and the model to plan, structure, and roll out. And to be part of that and to see our teachers in action was incredibly rewarding for me. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. And we're seeing someone from BSM as well, Jennifer Lahana, who's here, who's a learning support teacher, is saying, yes, I used it in my pull-out sessions with students. And Richard, you also reminded me that you had a librarian who took it. I remember sort of having a conversation with the librarian about how she would build out her storyboard if she felt like she was going in the right direction. Because when we wrote Learning That Transfers, we use the phrase mental model. It's a way of seeing the world. The world is sort of organized via concepts, and how do we help students to see the world in concepts? And it can work for sports, it can work for well-being, it can work for leadership. As Martin said, it can work for learning how to read, it can work for how do we interact with the library, because we've had a lot of librarians take our courses. And so that's what's just really neat about this model of sort of seeing the world through concepts. And you guys, I've seen a lot of schools do this. They will use Acquire, Connect, Transfer in their unit planners. So I think that is also huge, is that it's not just like, hey, put conceptual learning in your unit, but use Acquire, Connect, Transfer, or Acquire, Connect, similar transfer, dissimilar transfer, real world action. You use the storyboards almost, it seems like during the pandemic, like your high level unit planners. That's what teachers were sort of using, and they were kind of layering it on. You guys were a UBD school, understanding by design. You had your enduring understandings and all of those things, but it seemed like you were using the storyboard as almost shorthand for the units in the midst of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think the storyboard and the ACT model, that it really resonated with us as a school, and what they did was provide a very practical framework to scaffold concept attainment, lead into that near and distant transfer, and then with the opportunity of students taking action at the end, or that stage 5, as we often refer to it. And what we saw, the innovation in the curriculum was quite extraordinary. And as we spoke about the expectations, I might get to that a little bit later on in certain lessons learned. What were the expectations that we set out? And it wasn't a linear process. It was very organic, and as a result of the momentum, we felt that, okay, this is something we can embed further in our school, in our development plan, not only for this year but for years to come. And so the first thing was to create the opportunity. It was a course that was available to all. Anyone that signed up for it, we supported, and then we took it from there, and then started working with individuals and individual teams to see what else they needed, what barriers we could remove in order to enable those teams to thrive.
Love that. So the next question that I had, we can jump to lessons learned if you want, but I want to hear more. I'm interested. So we did some follow-up. We were a partner school. We did some live sessions where often I would do the keynote, and then we'd have breakout sessions where me and different people from my consulting team would meet with the different departments and grade levels, look at the storyboards. Often we would work through a storyboard, we give examples. We kind of went through some various iterations, looking at assessments deeply one session. And so we did some ongoing things, but you also had some internal professional development days. Could you maybe tell everybody who's listening how much time? Because I feel like often schools don't provide enough time for professional development. Maybe they see us like once every, 6 to 8 weeks or even less. But it seems like you were seeing us, and you were doing some internal PD. So around how much time were you offering to teachers for internal professional development? And can you describe those days? And this, for the most part, was online. I think at one point you guys did do one, maybe hybrid in person online, but what are your professional development days look like where teachers are sharing their work with each other? Because I think that also contributed to the momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. Our PD days are designed around what we call our 3 whole school drivers, which are teaching and learning, global citizenship, and well-being. I'm sure phrases that everyone is very familiar with. And what we did, we adopted those as drivers, which are aligned with the language of CIS. And we've had a focus on those areas for a number of years anyway, and it made sense to focus on each one of those drivers. Within each one, we have discrete goals, and they are clearly interconnected because teaching and learning and our focus on global citizenship and well-being, there is so many things that you will see in our curriculum that bring all of those ideas together, and also opportunities to extend the learning outside of the classroom. So the PD days that we have scattered throughout the calendar is supported also by our professional learning calendar. So we have Tuesday afternoons and Thursday mornings ring-fenced for professional learning.
How much time each of those? That's amazing. Twice a week.
Yeah, we have Tuesday afternoons from 2:40 to 4 o'clock. Okay. And then we have a Thursday morning from 7 till 8.
Okay.
And so we've got about 2.5 hours more or less per week. Now this covers everything. This is valuable departmental collaborative time. This covers all kinds of professional learning, whether it's safeguarding, trips and activities, planning. We're in a CIS year, so we need that cross-phase collaboration with our colleagues in primary as well. So that covers everything, but it's steady throughout the year. Time allocated for teams to work on areas to support their progress in their departmental and year level development plans, but also sessions specifically designed to focus on our whole school drivers. So in the case of the storyboards would be one example. We really focus on creating opportunities for teams to share their progress and harvest examples from across the school. So what we did was we collected all of the storyboards that we created, and it was in the region of 40 or so, I think. And then we centralized them on our PD website ahead of the session. We then invited the teachers to view and to leave kind and constructive comments on the storyboards. And it was also, we've been looking for ways to foster greater cross-curricular collaboration. And this was an opportunity to explore the approach to teaching and learning in other subject areas and in other year groups as well. We had access to primary, senior.
And that's what I loved about it, because often when I go to a school, they'll say, "Oh, with you here is one of the first times physically our primary and our secondary, or our senior and our elementary, are together." And that's what I loved, is you had math teachers sitting with English teachers, you had primary teachers. I loved that. So I'm glad you highlighted that as like, come and check it out.
Yeah, and it was an opportunity. We thought that it might spark a conversation that could lead to some kind of collaboration in the future. And in some cases it did. And then during the day itself, we had each department or year level share one of their storyboards, explain the techniques that we're using, whether it was the Freya technique, Freya model, or Bolt or Click, and many of these other techniques that were covered in the course. And then also providing opportunities of student work and student testimonials. They were really powerful, which of course they always are. And then another model that we experimented with was to share some examples of tasks that promoted the idea of transfer. Teams presented in front of 3s and 4s, and then we created a carousel so that the other teachers would go around from maths to humanities to science to PE to VPA, etc., and to learn more about it and to have those kind of conversations about how it worked and what was the what was the outcome in each
That's
case?
absolutely genius. So we originally asked Richard to write a blog post, and then I said, actually, let's do a live call. So if you're here live and you have a question for Richard that's burning, please put it into chat, and we'll just be monitoring that, because we want to honor that you came live. You didn't say, hey, I'll listen to the recording, which is probably what I do 90% of the time of webinars that I sign up for. But I want to take that nugget and have you write that up, if that's okay with you, of like, logistically, I'm just sitting here thinking a carousel, who's staying, who's moving, are they able to switch, a lot of these sort of really logistical questions. So if I could put you on the spot, Richard, would you like write something up of the logistics of that carousel PD sharing? Because I think that is really, in our conversations, it's been years that we've been working together, but I just kind of went back through my emails and looked at some different things that we talked about. And sometimes I would do like a morning keynote, and in some cases it was a video because I'm on the other side of the world. And then you would have those carousel and all of those things. So I just think that really contributed to buy-in. You've got really, really smart faculty. And I imagine if I were a teacher sitting there listening to one of my colleagues share these amazing examples, it would make me up my game. I think it would. And so I think that really, rather than just a consultant coming in, not that I'm just a consultant, but you know what I mean? I think it really, really contributed having teachers share. So that would be really wonderful if you could write up a little quick logistical, how did you do that, especially now in person? I know the first few times you did it via Zoom, and almost easier probably via Zoom, like put people in breakout rooms to rotate them around. I can see me doing that. But if you were to use, say, your gym or other community space or even classrooms at BSM, how does that logistically look like?
Yeah, and it was very much a collaboration. I can remember the meeting well. We had all the heads of department together. This is the idea, some kind of carousel. How would it work? We did what we refer to as a pre-mortem. If it all went pear-shaped this time next week, what would we have done wrong? So we kind of looked, okay, this would have happened. It wouldn't be clearly communicated and so forth. And so it was a collaboration, and something I learned many years ago in terms of organizing groups. Go speak to the PE team. These guys, they've got far more experience of constantly responding to uncertainty. And if there's 5 people that are supposed to show up and 12 turn up, and they played a really important role in that.
I love that. And that's something that you did. We highlighted, Martin, your head of school when I was there was Simon Mann, who's, kind of a legend PE in the PE world, in the school world. And, he kind of brought well-being to a high level at your school. And I'm so glad to hear you say what sort of made you want to choose to do conceptual learning was your sort of mission of global citizenship, of students doing something with their learning. So often that's like a poster on the wall, but it doesn't really live in the curriculum, in the classroom, in the instruction, the day-to-day. So I'm so glad to hear you sort of tie what we do to those sort of more global goals that we see around the world. I want to ask you about obstacles, and if you could, if you don't mind, I want to start with you often, Julia and I, we often talk about this. If it's an IB school, you're not a PYP or an MYP school. In fact, you're an IGCSE school. So you've got the diploma. So you've got people at the upper level who know what IB is, who have some idea of course, conceptual learning. But as we know, the diploma is not always very conceptual. And we definitely know that the IGCSE, by and large, is not thought about conceptually. So I'm thinking about when we work with British schools, British-centric schools, when we work with, of course, any public schools in the United States and Canada, this is often quite a leap to go to what you guys did with conceptual learning. IB schools, PYP is usually more like, yeah, we get it. And we can kind of hit the ground running. But as a British-centric school, as a school that, for the most part, and I hope you guys, nobody on the call takes offense to what I'm saying. Julia's like, oh Lord, what is she about to say? We always kind of joke that the Brits love their facts. They love their knowledge. They love established knowledge. And it's almost like this view of, I just got to get the kids to know these facts. to know this established knowledge. That's often almost like an outlook of teachers who've gone through the British school system, who've gone through the university, who've taken A levels, all of those things. And it's similar in the United States with advanced placement exams. Gifted in the United States often means more work faster rather than like more sort of intellectually challenging. And so can you talk about where were your teachers when you first went there? Where was your faculty in like the kind of knowledge versus almost real world transfer, sometimes debate, and any lessons learned about having some teachers who were maybe skeptical at first? Because let's be clear, not everybody jumped on right away, and it took some people or departments longer time. So, how any lessons learned or anything you want to share about teachers who maybe are afraid of the word concepts, or maybe think that suddenly this is going to be less academically rigorous? Anything like that that you could share with us?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a session that we did. This would have probably been back in 2018. And when we were first introducing the idea of concepts, moving away from content coverage and the idea of these concepts, these overarching organizing ideas that could help us unpick the curriculum and create those opportunities for students to apply their understanding. I think one thing that we did quite well, we certainly made many mistakes that we'll talk about perhaps a bit later on, but one thing that we did deliberately, we planned for, is we looked at examples from across the board. We looked at maths, we looked at the sciences, we looked at PE, we looked at drama, music, and so forth. And we provided examples of IGCSE examinations. We knew that would be a difficult nut to crack, as it were. So we wanted to demonstrate that even though the pedagogy in IGCSE it's not always promoted in the most conceptual way. But we wanted to demonstrate that a conceptual approach would still prepare students for those challenges, as well as creating more authentic opportunities to apply their learning to new and unfamiliar contexts. Yes. And we were very confident of that. So we looked at examples from past papers, and then I can remember in the meeting, we had teams together looking at where these concepts currently existed. Now, the IB diploma has certainly become increasingly more conceptual, particularly over the last 6 to 8 years. All the reviews, all the new specs have heavily favored that approach. IGCSE less so, but what we're seeing is that there is absolutely the opportunity to apply conceptual understanding to develop the skills and the knowledge that's required to prepare them for those examinations, which is still important for us as a school. Right. But there is also an opportunity to go beyond the curriculum, because it is quite restricted to simply follow the curriculum. And what we found is that there are still opportunities, whether it's the storyboards, whether it's the ACT model, or we've almost evolved in other ways where we've just looked at opportunities for transfer. We've got it in Key Stage 3, we've got it in Key Stage 4, and we certainly got it in Key Stage 5 as well in the IB diploma.
Yes, love that. I think that's so genius of examples of IGCSE demonstrating how this approach would have them be able to access that. And you're so right about it. We know that it's true. There's so much research out there. And I often share the research bits so that, those teachers who are scared might see it, but also sort of taking the actual exams or sample exams, I think is genius. I love that. That's really, really nice tip there. And any other obstacles? You said you're ready to share obstacles or lessons learned, either one, because we're getting close to time.
I think the first one with the obstacles, it's always time. I need more time. Any initiative, any change, and that's understandable, time and workload. So we were very careful to ring fence time in the professional learning calendar that I mentioned earlier on. I think that's really important. The other thing was to realize that that it's very much a journey, and that individuals and teams would make progress at different rates. And we realized that, and we had to find ways to remove barriers, provide support. And so what we did was we realized that certain teams required more time or more encouragement or more resources. We gathered feedback from heads of department, from teachers, with surveys looking at what are the areas that are still holding them back, what do they understand, what is something they'd like to learn more about, and then we could target those individuals and teams so that they could make greater progress. I think that was really important. Mistakes that we made along the way: try not to commit a suicide, which can be really difficult, and it's certainly something that I did, and I do still do from time to time. I think it's so important to realize that just because you've had a session, just because you've had some feedback, that you don't assume that everybody is in that same place. Everybody has understood the idea or the concept, they're running with it, and they're making a similar level of progress, because that's simply not realistic. And then following on from that, I think it would be clearly articulating expectations. I mentioned our journey was certainly far from linear. We shared a timeline and our expected goals. We celebrated success, and there was so much to celebrate along the way. But I think we could have been clearer in our communication with colleagues to ensure they knew exactly what they were working towards. And I think they would have benefited from that for sure. But I think the third one is something that you mentioned in your newsletter as a lesson learned, but such a valuable takeaway, and that is stick with it. We were committed, and we still are committed. This is not something that was a fad during the pandemic. Julie and the team have run this new course. Let's do it. 2-3 months later, we're moving out into the hybrid or face-to-face, and we move on to something else. We believed in it. We believed in the philosophy. It aligned with our thinking previously. And so we've embedded it. It's from our mission and vision to our whole school development plans, to our drivers, to our professional development plan, professional learning time. And then we also do it with parent workshops as well. That there's a shared understanding of the language, the ideas. We try the models out with them so that they can support and have those conversations with their children at home.
Love that. I've been doing, since I've been back in in-person travel, I've been doing a lot of parent workshops, and they love it. You know, the first few, I was a little bit nervous. I open up a survey and ask them to ask me questions. And often the survey is like, thank you for coming here. You know, like that's mostly what's in there. And, you know, it's parents want what's best for their kids. And I always come at it from an angle as a parent. I always show, of course, videos of my own kids demonstrating conceptual learning. And so really sort of connecting with them. So I love that. It's so important to involve everyone in the community, including parents in all of this. So thank you for that. We do have a question in chat about for teachers who aren't ready to just come up with the concepts. Maybe primary level teachers who teach multiple subjects. So it's kind of hard to say what are the concepts in social studies, what are the concepts in math for primary level teachers who teach multiple content areas. And I did want to say this, I did want to shout out another one of our British centric schools, Dulwich College, Shanghai, was an early adopter, and they did the same as you for mostly the primary. Christine Haslett is the head of primary there, and she took the IGCSE curriculum and she showed them where the standards are. And so, you know, to answer that question, Rachel, from a school that I know did this type of work, whole school in the primary levels, and I often will do that. If that's something Julie and I joke about, it like a superpower for us as professional learners, as consultants, is if we're in Canada, we pull up the province standards. If we're in Texas, we pull up the Texas standards. If we're working with an IGCSE school, we pull those up because teachers need to see how it applies in their context. And that really helps. We have a concept samples document, so I'll make sure I link that in the resources that we share, that we just sort of brainstorm, because elementary teachers or primary teachers in particular, they think really at the topical level. Like, I'm teaching kids how to tell time. I'm teaching kids their how to add and subtract single digit numbers like that. They'll tell us like these really specific things that they're doing. And so we have this document to say, if that's what you're teaching, here's some potential organizing concepts. But really starting with looking at the standards is, I think, the best place to start if you're a school that uses that. Sometimes we work with schools that don't, they just make them up. And that's, often a different trouble. But Richard, anything you want to add to that question in response?
Yeah, it was something that we spoke about in great detail, because very few teachers at that time had experienced other curricula outside of IGCSE or GCSE or A levels, IB diploma. And so we provided examples. There are so many examples out there. Of course, NYP has key related concepts. That was a good starting point. I think first of all, it was getting an understanding of subject-specific concepts.
That's right.
That maybe people weren't entirely familiar with. As an English teacher, there was a real epiphany, a real aha moment when reading some of having our discussions and reading some of Lois Lanning's work in particular, looking at, oh, right. So when we talk about stylistic devices, literary features, these are also concepts. And that was a real breakthrough moment for me when we talk about purpose, audience, diction, tone, and so forth. So providing examples, whether it's from NYP or other curriculum that's out there, that really resonated with individuals. Oh, okay, that's what we mean.
That's
and
right.
Whether it was VPA or PE or any other subject, that was really valuable. Developing that subject-specific understanding leads to that greater buy-in, and then you can start looking at the more macro level. You can look at those anchoring concepts or key concepts, whatever you want to call them, and things such as perspectives or relationships, power, identity, which of course bring in so many other subjects and so many year groups as well.
Yes, love that. As that's also what I do. So sometimes with PYP schools, they're so used to like form and function and these really esoteric words as concepts. And that's often what we emphasize is the related concepts are where to start. That's the magic. Let the students see living things for early years children. What is a living thing and how is it different from a non-living thing? Really kind of letting them to see what the IB calls those related concepts. Love that. Okay, so we're kind of coming up on time. Anybody, if this is your last chance, if you want to ask Richard a particular question. And so as I'm giving you guys the chance to do that, Richard, what's next for BSM? What's next for you? What's on the horizon? I just want to give you guys the opportunity. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you guys found this a valuable use of your time as well. So just, a little, let us know what's next for you guys.
Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity to share. Our focus at the moment is we are continuing to make developments in Key Stage 3 and 4, as well as in the IB diploma as well. We went through a process last year of articulating our guiding principles of teaching and learning, and this is something we did with our colleagues in primary. We're in the early years and Key Stage 1, we have a play-based approach to teaching and learning. So we have guiding principles of learning through play. And then for the older years in primary, going through into senior, we have our guiding principles of teaching and learning. And in those 9 principles, one of them is specifically, I've got it here, I think in front of me somewhere, learning is enhanced when teachers facilitate opportunities for students to transfer their understanding to new contexts. So we built it into one of our guiding principles. It aligns with our driver, and that's enabled us to really have a clearer shared understanding, the kind of language. We're doing professional learning sessions for each one of the guiding principles. We're looking at opportunities in the curriculum all across primary as well as in senior for students, not only to apply their learning to new contexts, but also to take action. We often speak about the idea of turning learning into action. And I think we've seen so many examples. We have a very active student body that lead all kinds of ASAs, and they're clearly demonstrating things that they're learning in class. leading students across the school, and they're making a profound impact on the communities that they're currently supporting, and their commitment to service learning. So that's been really powerful, and we're just enjoying supporting them on that journey.
Yes, love that. And so I want to end with somewhat of a big announcement, if I will. Through working with BSM and also from Dulwich College Seoul, Emma is a curriculum coordinator for the primary school there, who asked us for the idea of a certification, a school certification of some sort of conceptual transfer. And so Richard has agreed through partnership, through all of these conversations, all of these lessons learned, some wisdom there, we're going to start that process, because we think that would be a really cool sort of stamp for schools to be able to put on their websites, to really show that they are a school that's really committed to this. And I love that what's next is that student action, because you see so much with change makers out there. The UN SDGs, Julia and I are doing a lot of work with schools who want to incorporate the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into their curriculum. So I think that's spot on for where you guys should be going next. And I'm excited to continue supporting and collaborating and learning from alongside you guys as we go through this journey. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who came live. Thank you to all the BSM folks who are live here with us. And thank you for watching, if you're watching this. Any final words you would like to share, Richard, or anybody else who's on the call?
Yeah, thank you once again for the opportunity to talk about our experiences and our journey. Thank you to everybody that is watching this recording or has joined us live. As Julie mentioned, we're very open to collaboration. So if anyone wants to get in touch, share some ideas, and we can work in partnership, we're very open to that as well. So we look forward to hearing from anybody that would like to reach out and to collaborate moving forward.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. I hope everybody has a great evening or day, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks, guys. Bye, everybody.